This is my 1995 Dodge Viper RT10, and I bought it on September 19th, 2020. That was one of the most rewarding automotive days of my entire life, and it was something that I was so excited to do, and it was a dream that I finally was able to fulfill. But what made that dream just a little bit better was on October 10th, 2020, when my dad was also able to buy a 1996 Dodge Viper RT10. But this is not the Viper buying story you're probably expecting to hear. You see, when we bought these cars, not only were they totally filthy, one was in a barn, one was under a carport, and they had all sorts of issues. But we decided to take a risk, and we bought them anyway. So today, I, Breck Kennedy, am going to tell you the story of how we bought two Vipers for $38,000. I want to start with giving you guys a quick little backstory. So right around the peak of the pandemic, like April 2020, I had bought a Porsche Boxster. And I actually missed that Boxster, believe it or not, even with this sitting right here. But I had sold it at the time because, a few months later, the market went back up and I was able to make a nice profit on it. But my plan was I wanted to buy either a first generation Dodge Viper or a Lotus Elise, which funny enough is a car I also currently have, in the spring of 2021. And I was excited for it, but I kind of figured, it'll be a few months. I'll go through the winter without having an extra car, and it'll be perfect. But I was telling this plan to my stepdad, Mike, and he decided to look on Facebook anyways. And he came across a listing that he showed to me for two Vipers. Now, the listing was pretty bad. I mean, it had two pictures, both were blurry, and it pretty much just said, 1995 black, 50,000 miles, 1996 white, 58,000 miles, both the RT10s, 50,000 or best offer. And that wasn't a crazy deal at the time, but it was decent. So I decided to message the guy because I was curious, and his immediate response was something to the tune of, I only want $40,000 because I cracked the hood on the white one. So my immediate thought after I read that message was that this is clearly a scam. And I asked the guy for his phone number thinking he was going to tell me, oh, I'm not giving it to you, or some excuse, because I honestly did think it was a scam. He gave it to me, and I called him anyway. And I spent half an hour with him on the phone or so learning about these two cars. So he bought both of them from Don Schwarf Automotive. That is actually the largest Viper scrapyard in the country. They're in northern Wisconsin. I personally live in southeast Wisconsin. And these two cars are both located in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, about 6.5 hours from where I lived at the time. So I was talking to him, and we talked about this car first. And he had told me that this car was having a transmission issue. And, he kind of went over what he thought. But then we got to the other car, which had the cracked hood. And the story goes is he bought the car after he bought this one. He had it on a hill. It accidentally rolled down the hill, hit his plow truck, and cracked the hood. The problem with the hoods on the early Dodge Vipers is that they're very expensive to replace. In fact, when this car was new, this was the most expensive American part on a car at $24,000 a piece. And what essentially happened was he brought it to the body shop. The body shop quoted him $11,800 to repair the damage. And he didn't have the car insured yet because he didn't have it titled in his name yet. So he quickly tried titling it in his name, making the insurance claim, and they said no. They pretty much didn't believe him. He didn't really have proof that he didn't buy it like that, and he was just very upset with the car, and he decided he was going to sell it at a loss. Now, this was interesting because after I spent this half hour on the phone with him, I was pretty confident. Like, that story actually made sense. And I decided to ask him, I said, I need to see some more pictures of the car. I'm far away, and I need to see the VIN numbers. And it took me about 3 days to get them. I got them in 5 separate emails, and all the pictures were blurry. But he did send me the VIN numbers, and everything that he said in terms of the history of the cars, the colors, all sorts of things I could find based on the VIN, all matched what he was saying. So then I realized I was in an interesting situation because I realized most people weren't giving this guy the time of day, and I was able to figure out that everything that he was saying was completely legitimate. So at the time, I really was in no position to afford both of those cars. I was still living with my mom, and I was 19 years old. And I did everything I could to figure out how much money could I possibly scrape together, and I made the guy a pretty insulting offer on both of them, which he said no. And at first he was not really even wanting to split the cars, but after a few days of going back and forth, I gave him a weekend, and I said, look, I do still really want one of those cars. And he goes, well, which one do you want? So I told him I wanted the 95. I've always wanted a Gen 1. The 96 is technically a generation 1.5, kind of a weird thing we've covered on the channel before. But I went up to him, I said, I want the Gen 1. And he goes, well, make me an offer on it. So I thought about it, and I said, I'll give you $17,000, to which he replied, give me your best. And I said, well, I'll give you $18,000. And I will never forget the feeling when I was walking up the stairs into my house at the time, and I'll open my phone, and I see a message that says, if you bring me $18,000 in cash, you can have it. So now I'm like super excited, right? I know I'm getting the car, and I just got to go up and get it now. So I call my dad and I tell him, hey, I'm gonna buy this Viper, and I want him to come with me. And he understandably so was skeptical about the cars. I mean, he's a little more cautious when it comes to stuff like that than I am. But I was just really excited to be getting a Viper. But he agreed to go up there with me. He did insist on bringing a car trailer because he didn't have the faith that that car was going to be able to drive home. But we make the trip up there. We spend a night in the hotel, kind of close to where it was. We wake up early on a Saturday morning to go look at these cars. And I was incredibly nervous. I mean, he was sitting there telling me, hey, don't feel bad. Like, if this car is awful, we can turn around and it's not, I'm not going to be upset. But I really wanted the car. I was really excited for it. And I was just, the sinking feeling in my stomach, knowing, like, what if this car is an absolute pile, was sitting in my stomach the whole way up there. But we got to the gentleman's place, and the best way I can describe it is that it was similar to a place you would see on the TV show American Pickers. The guy had, various outbuildings. He had all sorts. I mean, he probably had dozens of old cars. I'm sure most of them didn't run, just based on, looking at them. But he had all sorts of crazy cool stuff. I mean, there's probably some true gems sitting up in some of his barns and stuff. We actually got to take a nice little tour of his property, and there was a lot of really cool stuff. But when we got there, there was a house off to the right, there was a barn in the middle, and there was a carport to the left. And we see this white Viper sitting under the carport. And the thing's, one, got a pink license plate frame on it. But there's like, the guy had like free range chickens and stuff. And they're all just around this Viper. And I'm like, this is wild. You'd never expect to see a Viper sitting under a carport with a bunch of wild birds around it like that. But we walk up into the barn and we open the door, and there is the dirtiest Viper I've ever seen in my entire life. So upon initial inspection of the car, there were a few issues that I wasn't 100% aware of. I knew it was having a transmission issue, but what I did not know was that the battery light was on and the parking brakes was completely seized. Like, you couldn't even move the handle at all. But I'm like, this isn't anything deal breaker. I kind of figured there was going to be a couple of things that were wrong with it. But, I look at it, everything seems to be okay, seems to be all there. And I tell the guy, I just want to take it for a quick test drive. And he's like, yeah, just, go like a mile down the road. You'll see a spot to turn around and come back. So I'm driving this. I never drove a Viper before. It's on like 20-year-old tires or something like that. And I was incredibly nervous, but I got through all 6 gears, and it actually was, I wasn't having a transmission issue with it. The clutch felt a little weird, but I was like, you know what? This is fine. And I bought the car and proceeded to drive it 335 miles home the same day. And then immediately proceeded to wash it because it was absolutely filthy. So then we had to tackle some of the issues that it was having. Thankfully, the transmission issue was probably the simplest thing that a transmission issue could be. The clutch assembly had a broken bolt, so every time the clutch was getting pushed in, this whole assembly was shifting, and we were able to put a new bolt in there, and that made the clutch and transmission feel so much better. Everything started working fine, and I was so happy that ended up being just a simple fix like that. The e-brake, on the other hand, that was a little more of a gross fix. So we were able to get it to eventually, like, we had to really, manhandle it and got it to move a little bit. And we slide the center console off, and there's just mouse nests under there. Unfortunately, the mice urine had pretty much seized the e-brake closed. So the whole interior ended up coming out that winter. I cleaned everything. It was really gross. And I was able to lubricate the e-brake and start to get it working again. The battery light was, I think it was because it wasn't getting driven a lot. It was kind of a pest for the first few months I had the car. But the more I drove it and the more I actually used it and left it on a trickle charger when I wasn't using it, it all kind of evened itself out, and I haven't had to issue the battery light in over 2 years. So then that brings us to this car. So as I said, this car was sitting underneath the carport when we went up to get my Viper. And, we looked at it at the time, and actually my dad actually made an offer on it with the guy at the time, similar to the offer I made. I actually think it was the same offer I originally made the guy, but he did not have an interest in selling it at the time. However, he never changed his ad after we bought mine and still said 2 Vipers, so I'm sure that was confusing people even more. And he actually reached out to me a few weeks later, and he pretty much said, look, your dad still wants it, like, I'm ready to make a deal. And he wanted $21,000, and he was going to throw in some extra parts. My dad told him he'll give him 20, and all he said was, fine, bring cash. So lo and behold, we ended up getting this here. Now, I didn't unfortunately get to go with him the second time when he went to buy his, and he did trailer it. He didn't have as much faith in his car as I did mine, but we have it here, and we're able to get it back. So then that brings us to the hood. So obviously that was the biggest concern that we have with this car. And really, there was a lot of general maintenance things that both cars needed, but the hood was the main concern with this one. And somehow, we were very fortunate. My dad, about a week after he got this, found a hood from another car. They only made 325 in this color scheme. And when you factor in how many have been totaled out over the years, and I'm sure the number is far less than that today, 25 years later, but we actually found a matching hood from the same color car, same stripes and everything. So we were able to throw it on It was only $2,000. So that was, I mean, that was probably the luckiest thing with this whole, purchasing these two cars. I mean, that would have been really the make or break for us, is trying to find a hood that was in good shape. And, obviously not having to paint it was huge right off the bat as well. So we're thankfully able to get that sorted out, and then we're able to get it in the shape that it's in today. Now, this car has been, modified a lot more than mine has, and I am going to eventually, once it's done with all the things that my dad wants to do to it, we're going to do another follow-up video and just kind of go over, all the things that have been changed and what kind of the vision was for this car as it sits today. So we fast forward today, and I've had this car for over 3 years now. I put over 8,000 miles on it, and I've had to do a few things to it, but overall, it's been a fantastic car, and I'm probably $22,000 or so into it. And I cannot believe, to this day, I cannot believe I have this car sometimes. I sometimes just sit there and look at it and I go, I feel very fortunate to have it. And it's just crazy to me, the whole story behind it and how far it's come in the last 2 years. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you like this new series of telling a story about a specific car. If you guys have any cool cars you want me to tell your story on, please let us know. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. All sorts of issues, but we took the risk on them anyway. Okay, this is bullshit. These stupid sirens.